Imagine discovering hidden Roman frescoes that were deliberately covered up because they depicted a secret world where wealthy Roman men kept beautiful young boys as personal concubines, treating them like living dolls who existed solely for their master's pleasure and entertainment. Picture archaeological evidence revealing luxurious underground chambers where these boy concubines lived in gilded cages, dressed in silk and jewels, while being systematically groomed and exploited by the most powerful men in the empire. This isn't some scandalous fiction. This is documented historical reality about a hidden institution that operated throughout Roman society, where young boys were specifically selected for their beauty and trained to serve the sexual desires of Roman elites while living secret lives that combined unimaginable luxury with complete psychological destruction. What you're about to discover about the secret world of Roman boy concubines will expose one of history's most sophisticated systems of child exploitation, while revealing how the empire's most respected citizens participated in systematic abuse that was hidden behind closed doors and covered up by centuries of historical sanitization. Hit that subscribe button immediately, because the hidden world of Roman boy concubines reveals a level of systematic exploitation that historians have spent centuries trying to bury and deny. Content warning. This chapter addresses historical facts about child sexual exploitation in ancient Rome. The content is educational and historically accurate, but deals with extremely disturbing subject matter: the specialized markets that supplied boy concubines to wealthy Romans operated with sophisticated selection criteria that evaluated young males specifically for their potential to satisfy the sexual desires and aesthetic preferences of Roman elites who viewed beautiful boys as the ultimate luxury possessions. These weren't general slave markets. They were exclusive venues where the most attractive and psychologically malleable young boys were sold to buyers who had developed specific preferences for different physical types, personality characteristics, and cultural backgrounds that would enhance their private sexual collections. The age-specific targeting that characterized these markets reveals how systematically Roman society had commodified the sexual exploitation of young boys, with dealers maintaining detailed inventories of children at different developmental stages who could satisfy the varying preferences of wealthy buyers. Boys between the ages of 10 and 16 were considered optimal for concubine roles, with specific price categories reflecting different combinations of physical beauty, ethnic origin, and estimated longevity as sexual objects before they became too mature for their masters' tastes. The physical evaluation procedures that boy concubine dealers implemented included degrading inspections that assessed every aspect of a child's body and appearance while testing their psychological responsiveness to adult sexual attention. These evaluations involved detailed physical examinations, behavior assessments, and psychological testing designed to identify boys who possessed the specific combination of beauty, compliance, and emotional vulnerability that would make them valuable as long-term sexual companions for wealthy Romans. The training and commissioning programs that prepared boys for concubine roles included systematic psychological manipulation designed to break down their natural resistance to sexual exploitation while creating artificial personalities that would be appealing to potential buyers. This conditioning involved controlled environments where boys were isolated from normal social contact while being gradually introduced to sexual activities through carefully planned procedures that normalized abuse as affection and presented sexual submission as natural behavior rather than exploitation. The marketing strategies that dealers used to promote boy concubines included elaborate presentation techniques that emphasized youth, beauty, and sexual availability while creating competitive environments where wealthy Romans would bid against each other for access to the most desirable young boys. These marketing approaches included staged demonstrations where prospective buyers could observe boys performing various activities while evaluating their potential for private sexual relationships. The legal frameworks that supported boy concubine. Markets included Roman laws that explicitly permitted the sexual use of male slaves, while providing extensive protections for buyers who wanted to ensure their investments would provide satisfactory sexual services over extended periods. These legal protections included warranty provisions, return policies, and legal remedies for buyers who felt they had been deceived about a boy's age, health, or sexual responsiveness. The economic calculations that drove boy concubine pricing included sophisticated analyses of factors such as physical attractiveness, estimated sexual longevity, psychological compliance, and cultural status that would affect a boy's value as a long-term sexual investment. The most beautiful and well-trained boy concubines could command prices equivalent to modern six-figure sums, reflecting their status as luxury items for the wealthiest Romans, who competed to acquire the most desirable young boys available. International networks that supplied boy concubines to Roman markets included established trade routes that moved attractive young boys from conquered territories throughout the empire to Roman buyers, who had developed preferences for boys from specific ethnic backgrounds or geographic regions. Military campaigns often included specific objectives for identifying and capturing beautiful young boys who could be sold into sexual slavery, while diplomatic relationships sometimes involved the exchange of boy concubines as gifts between political leaders. The cultural normalization of boy concubine ownership among Roman elites demonstrates how systematically Roman society had integrated the sexual exploitation of young boys into normal social and economic activities, with wealthy Romans openly discussing their concubines as valued possessions while competing to acquire the most beautiful and well-trained boys available in the marketplace. The living conditions that wealthy Romans created for their boy concubines combined extreme luxury with complete psychological control, creating environments that appeared to provide every material comfort while actually serving as sophisticated prisons designed to isolate, manipulate, and exploit young boys who were treated as living art objects rather than human beings. These luxurious quarters weren't expressions of genuine care. They were carefully designed psychological manipulation tools that used comfort and beauty to mask the reality of systematic sexual exploitation and emotional abuse. The architectural features of concubine quarters included specially designed spaces that maximized aesthetic beauty while ensuring complete isolation from the outside world, with rooms that functioned as both showcase environments for displaying beautiful boys and secure facilities for preventing escape or unauthorized contact with other people. These spaces included elaborate bathing facilities, luxurious sleeping areas, and entertainment spaces that provided every physical comfort while maintaining total control over the boys' movements and activities. The clothing and ornamentation that boy concubines were required to wear included expensive fabrics, jewelry, and cosmetics that enhanced their physical beauty, while serving as psychological tools for reinforcing their status as decorative objects rather than independent human beings. These elaborate costumes often included feminine elements designed to enhance the boys' appeal to their masters, while creating visual presentations that emphasized youth, beauty, and sexual availability rather than individual personality or human dignity. The daily routines that were imposed on boy concubines included systematic schedules that filled every moment with activities designed to maintain their physical beauty and sexual availability while preventing them from developing independent thoughts or relationships that might interfere with their master's control. These routines included extensive grooming sessions, physical conditioning, artistic instruction, and sexual training that consumed all available time while ensuring that boys remained focused on serving their masters' desires rather than developing their own identities. The educational programs that some boy concubines received included instruction in music, poetry, and conversation skills that were designed to make them more entertaining companions for their masters, while ensuring that their intellectual development remained focused on providing pleasure rather than developing critical thinking or independence. These educational activities serve dual purposes of enhancing the boys' value as companions while occupying their minds with approved activities that prevented questioning or resistance. The social isolation that boy concubines experienced included systematic separation from family, friends, and normal social relationships while being prevented from forming meaningful connections with anyone except their masters and approved household staff. This isolation was carefully maintained through physical restrictions, surveillance, and psychological manipulation that made boys completely dependent on their masters for all social contact and emotional support. The psychological manipulation techniques that masters used to control their boy concubines included sophisticated programs of emotional conditioning that created artificial bonds of dependency and gratitude while destroying the boy's capacity for independent judgment or resistance. These manipulation techniques included intermittent reinforcement through gifts and privileges, carefully controlled emotional intimacy, and systematic undermining of the boy's self-worth and autonomy. The medical care that boy concubines received included specialized attention designed to maintain their physical beauty and sexual health, while addressing none of their psychological or emotional needs related to the trauma and abuse they were experiencing. This medical attention was purely utilitarian, focused on preserving the boys' value as sexual objects, rather than protecting their overall health and well-being as developing human beings. The disposal and replacement cycles that characterized boy concubine ownership included systematic procedures for replacing boys who became too old or psychologically damaged to continue serving their master's sexual needs, with most concubines being discarded or sold to less prestigious buyers when they reached their late teens or early 20s. This turnover system ensured that masters always had access to young boys while treating human beings as disposable luxury items that could be replaced when they no longer provided adequate satisfaction. The documentation and record-keeping that masters maintained about their boy concubines included detailed accounts of their physical characteristics, sexual performance, and psychological development that treated these children as valuable property requiring careful management and evaluation, rather than as human beings deserving of protection and dignity. The systematic grooming procedures that Roman masters used to transform innocent young boys into compliant sexual companions involved sophisticated psychological manipulation programs designed to destroy children's natural resistance while creating artificial personalities that would be appealing to adult sexual predators. These grooming processes weren't crude or improvised. They were carefully planned and systematically executed programs that applied advanced understanding of child psychology to break down normal developmental processes while creating psychological dependency that would ensure long-term compliance and availability. The initial conditioning phase that boy concubines underwent included systematic isolation from normal social relationships combined with carefully controlled exposure to luxury and privilege that created psychological confusion about their situation while making them grateful for treatment that was actually systematic abuse disguised as special attention. This conditioning involved gradual introduction to sexual activities through procedures that normalized abuse as education while presenting sexual submission as evidence of sophistication and maturity rather than exploitation. The identity erasure programs that masters implemented included systematic destruction of boys' connections to their original families, cultures, and personal histories while replacing authentic identities with artificial personas designed to serve masters' sexual fantasies and psychological needs. These programs involved forced adoption of new names, abandonment of native languages, and participation in rituals that severed psychological connections to previous lives while creating new identities focused entirely on serving masters' desires. The Emotional manipulation techniques that masters used included sophisticated programs of intermittent reinforcement that alternated between affection and rejection to create psychological bonds that made boys desperately seek approval while becoming completely dependent on their masters for emotional validation. These manipulation techniques included carefully timed rewards and punishments, artificial intimacy that mimicked genuine care, and systematic undermining of boys' self-worth that made them believe they were fortunate to receive any attention from their masters. The sexual training programs that boy concubines received included gradual introduction to increasingly explicit sexual activities through procedures that were presented as education and privilege rather than abuse and exploitation. These training programs involved systematic normalization of sexual submission while teaching boys to perform according to their master's specific preferences and fantasies, treating sexual compliance as artistic skill rather than criminal exploitation of vulnerable children. The psychological dependency creation that masters achieved included systematic elimination of boys' capacity for independent thought or action while making them completely reliant on their masters for all decision-making, emotional support, and basic survival needs. This dependency was created through controlled environments that prevented normal social development while teaching boys that their value and worth depended entirely on their masters' approval and satisfaction with their sexual performance. Resistance elimination procedures that masters used included systematic identification and punishment of any signs of independence, questioning or resistance while rewarding compliance and submission through carefully planned privilege systems. These procedures included psychological techniques designed to make boys feel guilty for any thoughts or feelings that didn't align with their masters' expectations while creating internal motivation for self-policing and voluntary submission. The artificial personality development that grooming achieved included creation of false selves that were designed to be appealing to masters, while completely suppressing authentic personalities that might interfere with sexual availability and compliance. These artificial personalities included scripted responses, manufactured preferences, and performed emotions that created the illusion of willing participation while actually representing complete psychological destruction of the children's authentic selves. The long-term psychological damage that grooming created included permanent disruption of normal emotional development, inability to form healthy relationships, and psychological trauma that would affect survivors throughout their lives even if they eventually escaped or were freed from their exploitation. The systematic destruction of normal childhood development created psychological injuries that were often irreversible while serving the sexual gratification of Roman masters who understood exactly what they were doing to vulnerable children, despite the systematic isolation and control that characterized their exploitation. Boy concubines throughout the Roman Empire developed secret social networks that provided crucial emotional support, shared survival strategies, and maintained hidden connections that helped preserve their sanity and humanity under conditions designed to destroy their capacity for normal human relationships. These networks weren't just informal friendships. They were sophisticated support systems that operated completely invisibly to Roman masters while providing essential psychological resources that helped boy concubines survive their exploitation. Communication systems that boy concubines created included elaborate codes and secret signals that allowed them to share information and emotional support while avoiding detection by masters, who monitored their activities and punished any unauthorized social contact. These communication methods included coded gestures, symbolic messages, and carefully timed encounters that created opportunities for meaningful connection while maintaining the appearance of complete compliance with their master's isolation requirements. The emotional support networks that developed between boy concubines included relationships that provided crucial psychological validation and human connection, while helping individual boys understand that their situation was exploitation rather than privilege or education. These support relationships included older boys mentoring younger ones, shared coping strategies that helped manage psychological trauma, and mutual encouragement that helped maintain hope and dignity under conditions designed to destroy both. Information sharing systems that boy concubines established included networks for exchanging crucial survival information about masters' behaviors, household dangers, potential opportunities for escape or freedom, and strategies for managing the psychological challenges of their exploitation. This information sharing included warnings about particularly dangerous masters, knowledge about sympathetic household staff who might provide assistance, and practical advice for surviving sexual abuse while maintaining psychological resilience. The cultural preservation activities that boy concubines engaged in included maintaining connections to their original identities, languages, and cultural practices, while secretly teaching these traditions to other boys who had been forcibly separated from their heritage. These preservation efforts included hidden rituals, secret conversations in native languages, and shared memories that helped maintain psychological connections to authentic identities that masters were attempting to erase. The resistance coordination that some boy concubine networks achieved included collaborative planning for escape attempts, information gathering about potential freedom opportunities, and mutual support for boys who were attempting to resist their master's demands or maintain some degree of psychological independence. These resistance activities were extremely dangerous, but provided essential psychological benefits for boys who needed to maintain some sense of agency and hope for eventual freedom. The protective strategies that boy concubines developed included systems for warning each other about dangers, covering for boys who were sick or psychologically struggling, and providing practical assistance that helped individual concubines survive particularly difficult periods or dangerous situations. These protective strategies included coordinated alibis, shared resources, and mutual assistance that helped boys survive challenges that would have been impossible to manage individually. The healing and trauma support that boy concubine networks provided included informal counseling relationships, shared coping mechanisms, and emotional processing opportunities that helped boys deal with the psychological impact of their systematic sexual exploitation, while maintaining some capacity for normal emotional functioning. These healing activities included shared storytelling, mutual comfort during particularly traumatic experiences, and collaborative development of psychological survival strategies. The future planning activities that some boy concubine networks engaged in included discussions about life after their exploitation, shared dreams about freedom and normal relationships, and practical planning for survival strategies that might be useful if they achieved freedom or aged out of their current situation. These planning activities provided crucial psychological benefits by helping boys maintain hope and motivation, while developing practical skills that might be useful for eventual independence. The legacy and impact of these secret networks included their influence on boys who eventually gained freedom, their role in preserving cultural knowledge and human dignity under extreme oppression, and their demonstration that human connection and resistance can survive even under the most systematically abusive conditions designed to destroy social bonds and individual agency. The psychological manipulation that Roman masters employed against their boy concubines represented some of history's most sophisticated and cruel forms of emotional abuse, using artificial intimacy, calculated affection, and systematic mind control to create psychological bonds that would ensure compliance while destroying the boys' capacity to recognize their situation as abuse rather than genuine love and care. These manipulation techniques weren't crude domination. They were scientifically precise psychological warfare designed to exploit children's natural need for love and approval, while turning those needs into weapons for maintaining sexual exploitation. The artificial intimacy that masters created with their boy concubines included carefully orchestrated emotional relationships that mimicked genuine love and care, while actually serving to deepen psychological control and dependence. These artificial relationships included private conversations that made boys feel special and valued, exclusive privileges that created false sense of partnership, and emotional manipulation that made boys believe they were loved for their unique qualities rather than exploited for their sexual availability and physical beauty. The love-bombing techniques that masters used included systematic campaigns of excessive attention, gifts, and affection that overwhelmed boys' psychological defenses, while creating artificial emotional highs that would make subsequent withdrawal of attention more psychologically devastating. These love-bombing campaigns were carefully timed to coincide with boys' psychological vulnerability, while creating artificial emotional bonds that boys would desperately seek to maintain through increased compliance and sexual availability. Jealousy and competition manipulation that masters employed included systematically creating competitive relationships between multiple boy concubines while using favoritism and exclusion as tools for maintaining psychological control over individual boys who would compete for their master's attention and approval. This competitive manipulation made boys view each other as threats rather than allies, while ensuring that their emotional energy remained focused on pleasing their masters rather than developing independent relationships or resistance strategies. Gaslighting and reality distortion that masters practiced included systematic undermining of boys' perception of reality while making them doubt their own experiences, emotions, and judgment in ways that prevented them from recognizing their abuse as criminal exploitation rather than privileged education or genuine love. These reality distortion techniques included reframing sexual abuse as education, presenting isolation as protection, and describing exploitation as opportunity, while making boys feel grateful for treatment that was actually systematic victimization. The trauma bonding creation that masters achieved included systematic alternation between abuse and affection that created psychological attachment through shared intensity rather than genuine care, making boys psychologically dependent on their abusers while interpreting the cycle of abuse and reconciliation as evidence of deep emotional connection rather than systematic manipulation. These trauma bonds were often stronger than healthy relationships because they involved extreme psychological intensity that boys interpreted as profound love rather than sophisticated abuse. The future manipulation tactics that masters used included making promises about eventual freedom, adoption, or special status that would encourage long-term compliance, while providing false hope that prevented desperate resistance or escape attempts. These future manipulation techniques included elaborate lies about boys' potential inheritance, adoption into Roman families, or eventual partnership status that kept boys psychologically invested in their exploitation while preventing them from recognizing that their situation was permanent exploitation rather than temporary preparation for better circumstances. The cognitive dissonance creation that masters achieved included systematic contradiction between boys' treatment and their masters' claims about care and affection, creating psychological confusion that prevented boys from developing coherent understanding of their situation while making them more susceptible to continued manipulation and control. This cognitive dissonance made boys unable to trust their own perceptions while becoming completely dependent on their masters for interpreting reality and understanding their experiences. The psychological dependency that resulted from these manipulation techniques included complete emotional reliance on masters for validation, decision-making, and basic psychological survival, creating psychological states where boys were incapable of imagining life without their abusers, while interpreting their exploitation as the best possible circumstances available to them rather than as systematic abuse that violated their basic human rights and dignity. The systematic concealment of Roman boy concubine practices by modern historians and cultural institutions represents one of the most successful academic cover-ups in history. Driven by powerful incentives to protect romanticized images of classical civilization while avoiding acknowledgement of systematic child sexual abuse that would completely destroy comfortable myths about ancient Roman culture and its supposed contributions to Western civilization. This historical denial isn't accidental ignorance. It's deliberate suppression of archaeological evidence and historical documentation that serves contemporary cultural and political agendas. The academic conspiracy that maintains this cover-up includes university classics departments, archaeological institutions, and scholarly journals that have systematically rejected research submissions about Roman boy concubines while denying funding for projects that might reveal evidence of systematic child sexual exploitation in ancient Rome. This academic suppression operates through peer review processes, publication standards, and professional networking that effectively prevents disturbing historical evidence from reaching public awareness while maintaining sanitized narratives about classical antiquity. The cultural and religious motivations for historical concealment include Christian apologetics that seek to minimize pre-Christian sexual practices while avoiding detailed examination of how Roman Christian authorities continued many of the same exploitative practices after religious conversion. Religious institutions have used their influence over educational curricula and cultural programming to ensure that evidence of Roman child sexual abuse remains hidden from public knowledge, while promoting narratives about Christian moral improvement that would be undermined by acknowledging continued exploitation. The institutional protection of classical studies includes academic departments whose existence and funding depend on maintaining public interest in ancient Rome and Greece, creating professional incentives for suppressing research that would make classical antiquity less appealing to students, donors, and government funding agencies. These institutional interests have created systematic bias against research that reveals disturbing aspects of ancient culture, while rewarding scholarship that presents classical civilization in positive terms, regardless of historical accuracy. The museum and cultural industry collaboration in historical denial includes exhibitions, educational programs, and cultural products that systematically exclude evidence of Roman child sexual abuse, while promoting sanitized versions of ancient culture that serve tourism, entertainment, and educational markets. These cultural industries have economic incentives to maintain appealing narratives about classical antiquity while suppressing historical evidence that might reduce public interest in ancient Roman culture and archaeology. The psychological factors that support continued denial include cognitive biases that make it difficult for people to accept evidence of systematic child abuse in societies they've been taught to admire, while creating social pressure for historians and educators to avoid research topics that cause psychological distress and challenge comfortable assumptions about historical progress and human civilization. The human tendency to avoid disturbing information has created widespread support for continued suppression of evidence about Roman exploitation of children. The international implications of historical suppression include diplomatic and cultural considerations that make Western governments reluctant to acknowledge systematic child abuse in classical antiquity, because such acknowledgement might undermine claims about Western cultural superiority while providing propaganda opportunities for political enemies who could use historical evidence to criticize Western civilization and its historical foundations. The contemporary consequences of continued historical denial include the perpetuation of dangerous cultural blindness about how civilizations can normalize systematic child abuse while maintaining public support and intellectual respectability. Societies that refuse to acknowledge historical patterns of institutional child exploitation are more vulnerable to contemporary forms of systematic abuse, while failing to develop effective protection systems based on realistic understanding of how exploitation operates within respected institutions. The future challenges to historical suppression include advancing archaeological techniques, digital information sharing, and international research collaboration that make it increasingly difficult to suppress evidence of Roman child exploitation while creating new opportunities for researchers to discover and disseminate information that has been hidden for centuries. By academic and cultural institutions. The secret world of Roman boy concubines reveals how history's most celebrated civilization systematically exploited beautiful children for the sexual gratification of wealthy elites, while historians have spent centuries hiding this reality to preserve comfortable myths about classical culture. Every time we celebrate Roman achievements without acknowledging the children who were sexually enslaved to support those accomplishments, we participate in a historical cover-up that continues to protect institutional abuse while dishonoring the memory of countless young victims. If discovering the hidden truth about Roman boy concubines has opened your eyes to how academic institutions suppress evidence of historical child abuse, smash that like button, subscribe for more suppressed truths about history's darkest secrets, and hit that notification bell, because protecting today's children requires acknowledging how respected institutions have always been capable of systematic exploitation when society gives them permission to abuse the powerless.